What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is Brainpower. I am your host, Bowen, and today we have some breaking news coming out of the Morpheus community. I have David Johnston jumping on the show. You should be familiar with David. If you're not by now, check him out on X. Check him out on other episodes of Brainpower. I don't know what this something is that I was doing, but I'm really hyped up and excited because we are talking all things Capital Contract V2, which as of the time of this releasing is now live. Morpheus and the Morpheus Capital Contract is now a multi-yield source contract. We'll get into everything that means, what the implications are, and looking forward, what you can expect with this update. As always, if you'd like to support Brainpower, all that we ask is that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share it with somebody in your life who you think will enjoy it and enjoy learning about decentralized AI. If you really want to support Brainpower, consider staking to our Builder subnet on the Morpheus Builder dashboard. With that being said, and without further ado, here is David Johnston.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brainpower.
He is the most commonly seen face on this channel other than my own. It is David Johnston. David, thank you for jumping on today.
Hey, it's good to be here, Bo.
So I had planned on doing at least quarterly updates with you and everything that you're involved in building out Morpheus, but I reached out to do kind of a emergency press release because as of the time of viewers listening or watching this, the Capital Contract V2 is live. And so we need to talk about what that means, what are the implications, and why everyone should be as excited about this as I am. I will let the audience know this is the update I've been most excited about for like 12 months, basically, or just about, probably about 10 months since, it first was being theorized by the community.
100%. Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk about the Capital V2. For anybody that hasn't been following, effectively this extends Morpheus to people providing other types of yield, right? So most people know Morpheus started with staked Ethereum via Lido. This will integrate Aave as well. So if you've lent, stablecoins or Bitcoin or Ethereum on Aave, it gives you a little bit of yield, right? Like 3%, 5%, depends on the asset, depends on how much demand there is for the asset. But effectively what this integration does is it lets people deposit a token on Aave and then direct that yield into Morpheus. And this is a big deal for a lot of reasons. Like, firstly, it massively expands the amount of assets that can participate in Morpheus, right? There's $300 billion, $400 billion of ETH out there, but there's $2 trillion of Bitcoin. There's now hundreds of billions of dollars of stablecoin flowing into the ecosystem, especially with all the changes that have happened recently to the regulatory environment where it's gotten a lot friendlier. Even today, we saw the announcement between Google and Coinbase integrating stablecoins for agents, which is huge. And the partnerships are like Stripe and Visa, and all these groups are effectively getting onto the Web3 bandwagon. And most of them are doing it through stablecoins, right? And so with these huge new inflows, it's like, okay, let's open up the community to not just people holding ETH, but that want to hold Bitcoin. That maybe they're, think a bear market's coming and they've put something in stablecoins. Like, people have a lot of reasons to hold different assets, and Morpheus ought to be neutral, right? It ought to leave that decision to the individual to hold whatever asset they want and keep that long-term perspective and exposure to that asset, right? And so before, maybe you had to buy ETH and stake it and decide if you wanted to hold ETH or not. Now you'll be able to hold a number of these top assets and still direct the yield into Morpheus. So for me, that's huge because we've always said Morpheus is a neutral platform. Morpheus is for everybody, but this really sort of makes it real in the sense that it extends it to all these communities.
Yeah, I want to double click on the stablecoin piece because that specifically is the piece that I'm most excited about, because basically what I can now do is my savings account, which I basically in practice, for people listening to this, I don't really use a bank. I mean, like I have a bank account and for things that I am required to use a bank account for, I do. But for other things, I'm trying to follow the ethos of DeFi to the best of my ability, and I encourage other people to do the same with proper security measures and guidance, might I add. And just as a reminder, brainpower is not financial advice. But I can now use stable assets that I would be otherwise using as within a savings account and maybe lending out in a DeFi protocol like Aave or earning yield in some other way, and I can take that yield in more. I no longer have to take it in US dollars, which is so exciting. You are able to take a single-sided bet basically on the Morpheus ecosystem without taking any principal price risk. And like I cannot stress enough how cool that is, and also highlight other types of DeFi activities that you could do to accomplish this. So for example, David, I don't know, I mean, I know you're familiar with obviously a lot of DeFi protocols, but something that comes to mind for me is if somebody has, let's say they have a lot of Ethereum and they don't want to stake it to a protocol, but they would be willing to maybe borrow against it on a DeFi protocol. Now I could do that, and I could have a DeFi strategy where I'm holding ETH, I'm taking some sort of stablecoin position against it, and then staking that staked stablecoin to the Morpheus protocol. And that gets a little bit fancy with the finance trickery, but it opens those doors, which were not open before.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let me start with what you said on stablecoin. People are making 0%, 0% on their traditional bank account, right? Brian Armstrong pointed out this the other day. I guess they just opened up their service to Canada. And they're like, look, if you're making 0%, come at least hold that in USDC and be earning 4%, right? And that's just in the case of something like Coinbase, which is more custodial. But Aave, I've seen rates paying like 5, 6, 7% sometimes for if you're depositing stablecoins. So what I love is these are non-custodial systems that Morpheus is integrating with. And so people still have ownership of their token, right? You're not giving it to Morpheus. You know, the Aave platform is just a series of smart contracts. You can deposit and withdraw as you want. And to your point, like, oh, wow, well, I have the money in my bank account already. I might as well stake it and get upside in the form of the more token, because that gives me part of the future of this new agentic internet that's getting built, right? And I've published articles about this before. Like, if you want to own part of the new robotic economy, blockchains are the way to do that, right? And so if everybody's trying to figure out, like, how do I benefit from AI, this is a really simple way to do, nothing different with your money than you're already doing, right? You're holding the same number of dollars, and now you're able to stake them and get this benefit. So firstly, yeah, like that's huge because it opens it up to corporates, to individuals, to anybody that's holding a dollar balance. All of a sudden they have a new way to leverage that cash that's not costing them anything. To your point, most people probably aren't doing this today. So it's not like they're losing anything. We saw the same thing with the early days of Morpheus. 70% of people were not staking their ETH. We could tell on chain because it was ETH sitting in a wallet, and then it went to Lido, and then it got staked on Morpheus, right? They weren't already staking. Morpheus gave them a reason to stake their ETH, right? Which is really cool. Like we're basically inventing with this new economy a reason for people to participate in Web3, right? A reason for them to get onboarded to this technology and see these benefits. So that's the first point. Yeah, I completely agree. And to your point about DeFi, yes, it opens up all these DeFi tools, that weren't accessible to Morpheus users before. All of a sudden, those become accessible, right? And the third point I want to make is I really, really hate central points of failure. Like, decentralization is a spectrum, and you want to get more and more decentralized over time. And it always kind of felt uncomfortable that Morpheus was using only one way to get yield, right? Yeah. And a lot of that was technical. You needed it to be a bifurcatable yield, right? A lot of yield tokens, they increase the value of the token versus give you extra of the token, right? You needed the Lido style where you could direct the yield in, right? So there weren't a lot of choices, especially like 2 years ago, to do this. And so, adding Aave, it makes Morpheus a lot more robust because, God forbid, there be some issue with Lido in the future. People have a choice. They can be using Aave, they can be using other assets, right? It makes Morpheus a lot more decentralized on the capital form, that it's not like dependent on one set of smart contracts, right? It starts to make it, an open marketplace for these technologies over time.
Yeah. Become more anti-fragile the more different sources you have without having a single point of failure. It's like having two
Yeah.
engines in your car versus one, basically.
Right.
Um,
Right. And
what?
and and it's worth saying that you don't want an infinite number, because if you had like some small untested smart contracts that have some vulnerability, then you're opening up risk for the users. So it's been this balance of like, okay, what are the well proven, well tested, right? There's tens of billions of dollars on Aave, the same for Lido, right? So like, what's that gold standard of tech that is well proven? So you're not adding a vulnerability, but you're adding more robust options, right? So that's kind of just to give people an idea. That's how we think about like the balance of how do you give people choice without exposing them to something that's untested or unproven.
Well, it's the Morpheus community though, because everyone listening to this, no, this is going to be a surprise to no one. I'm not a smart contract developer, or really any type of developer from a technical perspective. And so, what I love is the amount of, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, cautious development that the Morpheus community takes. Because you're right, you have to strike that balance of you want more options that are also still safe options, and the release of this was delayed a week for the benefit of the community because there was a massive malicious hack last week. That's the type of thing I love. As somebody who doesn't make this stuff myself, I love knowing, hey, the people that are making these things and also investing, time, resources, their own capital into these things are willing to go the extra mile to say, hey, let's just double check. Let's just be sure before we push it live, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think reputation is underestimated. We've just passed the 10-year anniversary of the Ethereum Genesis block, and to their credit, the Ethereum chain has had zero downtime in
Yeah,
10 years.
ever.
Ever.
No one
Right?
else can say that. I mean, I'm sure someone else can say that. No one at
Yeah.
scale can say that. I mean, no matter what Solana does, Ethereum will always be able to say that. Well, at least, for now. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are different engineering choices, right? Solana pauses their chain instead of allowing for forks. Ethereum allows for forks, but they're so cautious about not causing a fork. They haven't seen that issue. And those are different engineering choices. But yeah, that reputation is extremely valuable over time. And what's cool is, we're here in the second year of Morpheus, is it's on track for that gold standard, right? Really well thought out. Like, the contracts have never been hacked or exposed. And to give people context on your comment earlier, every time there's one of these big security vulnerabilities, maybe everybody saw the news about the JavaScript exploit that you were alluding to, it didn't end up affecting Morpheus, but it's always good. Like, a first reaction is, let's go recheck the contracts. Let's look at the dependencies. Let's look at the dashboards, right? Because they may be calling to some JavaScript. Do you need to update any of those packages or dependencies? And that's sort of like serious adults in the room, like, this is real money and you got to treat it like that, and you got to spend the time and the energy and effort, was there since the beginning, right? The Morpheus authors suggested a 4% set aside for the protection fund, right? And those are the funds, those emissions of more tokens have paid for all these audits and all these security updates and all these checks. Like, Morpheus is probably one of the more audited protocols in the world. Like, every time there's a new update, like, it goes through that process, a private audit, a public audit, a bug bounty, depending on how, critical the changes or updates to the contract. And so, but that matters over time. Like, people want to know this stuff is rock solid, and you have to spend a lot of time doing that. So yeah, but it feels like it's headed in a really good direction. And what I'll also say is, the cool thing about Aave is it doesn't just get us one more asset. To be clear, this new version can support any new pool on Aave, right? So the question becomes, what are the pools that are deep enough to be interesting to users, right? Because practically you can't add thousands or hundreds, like it would just be too much work to upkeep them all. But like, what are the top ones? And so I believe the plan is to start with wrapped Bitcoin, right? So everybody holding BTC, can contribute. The yields are lower on Bitcoin because there's not as much lending in that, but it goes up and down based on how much demand there is. But if you're going to hold the Bitcoin anyway, even if the yield is relatively low, you might as well, right? Contribute it and not lose custody and do something like higher up the risk curve, right? Then there's stablecoins. The biggest two by far are USDC and USDT, right? So Coinbase and Circle have USDC. Tether famously has built USDT. Different audiences. USDC tends to be more domestic, US style. USDT tends to be more of an international audience, but both are fairly liquid, and the yield rates are pretty good on the lending. It's very active lending for both. So
The USDC market on ETH mainnet is $6 billion, currently earning a almost 4.6% APY, or yield rather. Tether 6.65 billion, almost 11% APY currently. Wow.
Yeah. those are pretty good rates, right?
Those are
And
equity type returns on a stable asset.
yeah,
That's crazy.
which is why so much value is flowing into this permissionless economy, right?
This actually,
Yeah.
David, really quick, this actually goes to my point I was making on like the magic internet money DeFi strategies. So for
Yep.
example, not saying someone should do this, but I might, toy around with it. If I took something like STETH, and let's say I had, we'll just use nice round numbers, $100 of STETH, and I'm holding it as my collateral on Aave, because remember on Aave, you don't have to borrow against the same collateral type. So if I take my STETH and I put it on Aave, I still own that STETH, so I'm still earning the whatever 3% APY ETH on ETH. But then I say, okay, I'm going to borrow $30 of Tether, for example. What I'm trying to get at here is I could set up a strategy. I'd have to make a flow of how it would work, because how I just described it actually wouldn't work. But the point I'm trying to get to is I could have a world where I am borrowing a stable against my STETH, continuing to earn the ETH on ETH return, and then I'm staking that stable to Aave, something like Tether. Like if let's say I did this, I did a collateralized debt position on something like Oasis, and I took STETH and I minted DAI against it. And now I swap my DAI for Tether, so that's a dollar for dollar exchange, no capital gains. Then I lent my Tether to Aave and turn around and stake it to Morpheus. Now I'm still earning ETH on ETH, but I'm earning 11% APY in the Morpheus capital contract because I've leveraged the Tether instead of the STETH. And my yield I'm actually accruing is like a multiple higher than it would have otherwise been. Like this is now opening the door for that type of thing, which I'm sure a bunch of people listening to this are going to be like, what the heck are you talking about? But for like the two people that understood what I just said, you got to consider this type of strategy. I'm just kidding. There's more than that. I'm selling our community way too short. Yeah.
There's probably a few million DeFi people that know what you're talking about. But just to put it simply, there's a lot of arbitrage. It opens up a lot of cool opportunities for people to hold whatever asset they want, right? Securely, non-custodially, right? Without giving up, their ownership, and sort of, contribute to these different pools. So wrapped Bitcoin, USDC, USDT. I think also the plan is to start with ETH as well. Right. So ETH on Aave, and you'll still have the option, of course, to do staked ETH on Lido. So it's worth pointing out that's not going away, right? These are complementary options. But one thing we haven't talked about is how does the calculation work? Because people might be thinking like, wait a minute, if there's all these different assets, Bitcoin, Ethereum, stables, how do you compare the yield? And the answer is fairly simple. There's a Chainlink integration as part of this, and kudos to the folks at Chainlink for creating all these robust oracles for basically taking the price feeds, right? So here's your price for Ethereum, here's your price for Bitcoin, here's your price for various stablecoins, and you can use that to convert whatever yield is contributed into a USDC value. So, okay, at this moment, when you contributed that wrapped Bitcoin yield or that Ethereum yield, it equaled this much USDC. So we're moving from a competition of how much staked ETH yield, because that's how it used to be calculated in the V1 of the contract, to this new competition where it's like, okay, it doesn't matter where it comes from, it's all going to get converted into that common denominator, into how much USDC are you contributing, right? So it's helpful to understand that's how this new system is working. And it'll be interesting. There may be some people that are long-term agnostic and like they're just going to hold whatever gives them the best yield today, right? And compete on that basis. Or like people feel very strongly, no, I got to hold ETH or Bitcoin or stables, then they can just hold that position and continue to get that benefit. And maybe they're not tracking or optimizing for the yield. They're optimizing for their long-term position. But Morpheus gives you the option, whichever can. Yeah, it still gives you the option. And maybe another thing good to cover in this is for those familiar with how Morpheus works on the capital side, there's a big incentive to lock your more rewards, right? So I'm not talking about locking your Bitcoin or your ETH. I'm not talking about your principal. I'm talking about your more rewards that you're earning. There's a multiplier for people that lock them up for 90 days or a year or 2 years, or like I locked some of my up for a bunch of years in the future, and it increases your ability to compete in that competition, right? So it's amount of USDC yield times that multiplier, because what Morpheus really wants are people that are dedicated to this vision of decentralized AI, of this new agentic internet, that want to be part of that long term, not just, oh, cool, I got some yield and I dumped it next day, right? That's not interesting. The goal of the Morpheus Capital contributors is to bootstrap the whole network, right? To reward everybody that's earning these tokens for code contributions, compute. They're helping build the platform itself. They're releasing agents. They're a builder. Like the goal is to support those folks and bootstrap the network. So there's a strong preference in the Morpheus system for people that are doing that time multiplier. So that whole system is staying exactly the same. It's just worth emphasizing, like that's what Morpheus is really searching for, is people with a long-term vision of this.
Yeah. Can you revisit what is actually happening with that yield that's going into the capital contract? Because there's probably people listening to this who are saying, okay, great, where's that money going?
Right. Oh, that's a great question. And this is one of the things that really impressed me when I first read the Morpheus white paper, is there is no company. There's no foundation. There's no treasury, right? There's no pre-mine in Morpheus, right? We don't even know who wrote the white paper with some anons, right? So where does the capital go? It goes into protocol-owned liquidity, which means that all of that money buys more tokens out of Uniswap, out of Aerodrome, right? Out of these dexes where it's trading, and either burns it or locks it up for 16 years, right? So
Level, right? So people can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody can see on-chain the burns and the locking and all of these mechanisms. You can see how much protocol and liquidity is sitting on Uniswap in the different trading pairs. You can go to Morelord. It shows detailed account of every transaction ever in the protocol and liquidity. So yeah, it's all transparent. But the knock-on effects, the second order effects of that are really important. It means that there's nobody holding somebody else's money. You don't have to, trust that those funds, are going to go, fund somebody's pet project, or, this particular, cousin of the developer, or there's some committee, or there's some bureaucracy. Like, no, you can get rid of all of that because it's just creating demand for the token, right? The yield is constantly buying, like every couple of minutes. I can see on chain, there's another buy, there's another buy. It's constantly soaking up the more supply. And so you sort of have this constant buyer of the token in order to bootstrap the network. And that's to me really novel, right? And this doesn't stop. It's not like a one-time thing. It doesn't go for 30 days or a year. This is part of the entire 16-year supply curve, right? As long as it happens. And then what happens with those locked tokens? They come back as the block reward in the next 16 years. So they're basically recycled without creating new tokens, right? So Morpheus has got this amazing structure where you can both have a hard cap at 42 million tokens. Because of the burning, it'll be something less than that. But the recycling keeps the block reward going for basically forever. Like the chart goes out for 256 years, but that's just how far the chart goes. Like it keeps going like the next 1,000 years or whatever. And so there'll always be a block reward, but the scarcity will always be increasing, right? Which is a really interesting combination. Like Bitcoin mastered scarcity, but the block reward runs out. So we're counting on transaction fees in the Bitcoin ecosystem to keep going. Ethereum has infinite inflation forever. They're counting on the burn mechanism to keep the inflation down, right? But they don't have a hard cap, but they'll never run out of block rewards. So these are the trade-offs. And as far as I know, Morpheus is one of the first protocols to basically both have a hard cap and not run out of block rewards using this type of burn and recycle mechanism, which is, to me, really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's the only one too, at least that I've ever heard of. Well, and
Yep.
also, if you look at it, if you look at the project as and when I say startup, I don't mean startup business. I more just mean like startup idea that people are building things on. Typically,
Yep.
people need to raise some type of venture capital money, and then what they're able to say is, okay, we have X amount of runway based on a burn rate, and if this thing isn't built by then, you either need to raise more money or it dies. This lives on perpetually because there's a constant buyer. Like that is, to my knowledge, the buyer is itself. And it's
Right.
actually rewarding people for providing the yield to allow it to buy itself. And so, yeah, it really is a genius mechanism. In practical terms, David, so right now, that liquidity that's being protocol owned liquidity that's being market purchased is happening in an ETH more pool. Is that now going to be expanded to these other asset pools?
That's a good question. I'll have to check if there have been some recent Morpheus requests for comments, sort of the improvement system of Morpheus. People will put out proposals. I haven't seen one specific to changing the protocol on liquidity as part of this, right? This is just about creating more of that yield coming in. But the yield will be used for the same purpose, right? So whether it gets swapped from USDC or wrapped Bitcoin into ETH and still does the same thing of buying, ETH for more, I think it's really sort of a minor question, but it might be useful, right? As an addition to the protocol and liquidity, if you could support other pools, right? Other trading pairs, if you've got a constant source of that new type of yield, or at least it would save you sort of like one extra step of having to do a swap or something like that. But the
Yeah.
community's already created trading pairs against USDC, against more to VVV, against more to ETH. There's actually a lot of pools already out there, and economically, I don't know if it matters too much where the demand enters the system because it enters it as a whole, right? Any pool that's not directly getting that demand, people can move their tokens over, right, and trade at that new price, right? So people are constantly already arbitraging
Yeah.
between the pools, but it's worth thinking about. And as the yield grows, it might be an interesting consideration.
Yeah. Sufficiently liquid and sufficiently stable. I don't mean stable in price, I mean the network stability. So it's, not exactly a high risk liquidity pair. The reason I think it could matter maybe is not so much at the protocol level, but at the investor level. If I was providing liquidity through an LP token to a liquidity pool, and I wanted to specifically be long Morpheus, doing a more stable LP token limits my impermanent loss. Where my impermanent loss on a more ETH pair is just inherently more risky because they're both floating price assets. Does it actually matter today? Not necessarily, but I think it's maybe worth, and maybe I'll be the one to propose it. I don't know, but I could I should eat my own cooking here and go make the proposal to the community. But just something to think about.
Yeah, no, I love it, and that's the cool thing is, you know, Morpheus doesn't bottleneck through the intelligence of any one person. I think often because I speak at the conferences and I'm so passionate about Morpheus, people give me a little too much credit. Like there are 300 code contributors, there's 6,000 capital contributors. There are people, doing Morpheus meetups in Asia and Latin America and all over the world. And so, you know, the nice thing is you can benefit from the brain power of all of those people because it's open source, because it's permissionless. You make that proposal, and the maintainer's like, yeah, this makes sense. That it'll get implemented, right? And so I really like that type of system. It also lets anybody create a voice for Morpheus. Like it's sort of like we are all Morpheus, like we are all Satoshi,
Yeah.
kind of concept, right? You didn't have to ask anybody's permission to start a podcast that had a
Not exactly like that, but kind of like that, where I started to figure out how can I get involved, and this
yeah,
was my skill set, and I was like, let's do it. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Yeah, which
that's
there's an
awesome.
endless number of those types of things, whether it's technical or non-technical, for people to get involved in. While we're on the topic, David, can we talk a little bit of the travel circuit? I know you are hitting some events coming up here, as well as other Morpheus community members. What's on the docket?
So I think two or three of the big conferences the rest of the year, those going to Korean Blockchain Week. I know there's a number of Morpheus community that are going to be there. So look for the posts. A lot of decentralized AI events are happening. So go on the Lumas and be sure to register. The bigger event is usually Token 2049. So that's coming up in October, first week of October. Also the network state at the end of that week on the 3rd of October. Both those are really interesting events, both in Singapore. Tends to be a lot of capital people, a lot of projects, a lot of Asia focused communities. And then, of course, DevCon is coming up in November. So, Argentina seems like they're headed on a great trajectory. And, if you wanted to get to Buenos Aires, like it's
Yeah.
a good excuse to do that. I think that's November 17th to 22nd. So those are all coming up. On the AI side, NERPS is, I think, in San Diego this year at the beginning of December. So if you've never been to, it's a very AI like academic type focused type event, but more of the crypto people are starting to show up and like, hey, here's all these tools you can use for your AI for payments and for inference and all these things. So I went to the one last year in Vancouver and it was like me and the guy from Bagel and Akash and a few others like sort of planting those seeds, but hopefully we see even more.
Heard last year that this was the equivalent to David and maybe a couple other people carrying a Bitcoin sign into the New York Stock Exchange in like 2011. That
Yeah.
you guys were like planting the flag of DAI. I bet, I'm very curious to hear, because unfortunately I won't be able to attend, but I bet the show out of DAI will be multiples higher this year than it was last year, and even more so probably by next year, which will be I can't wait to hear about that. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. Well, especially since last year the technologies had these huge leaps, right? As far as integrating the two tech stacks of Web3 and AI. And now you've got these moves by Google, right, and Coinbase to integrate, they're calling it AP2 for agent to payments protocol to go along with their agent to agent protocol. So even like those announcements are probably like waking people up to, oh, I can use stablecoins for my agent. Oh, I can use this infrastructure. So yeah, I think we might get an interest, and it's also because it'll be in San Diego and the U.S. has gone so crypto friendly. We may see a lot more stuff than internationally, or if it was hosted somewhere else.
Forget that the election was not even a year ago. That's crazy. I mean, this time last year, the Morpheus community was still very unsure what anything related to crypto was going to look like over the next, following months after that. Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy. That just hit me with a time warp a little bit, David. I'm not gonna lie. I just hit me that, yeah, when this happened last year, the election hadn't even occurred yet, so the political sphere around what's happening was very different. Um,
Sure. Now you've
that's
had
interesting.
legislation passed for stablecoins, Genius Act, stuff like that. You've had the SEC now is saying crypto is the future and banks can hold Bitcoin and now you can get a mortgage backed in Dogecoin and like, all these things, all these barriers just fell away. And now you've got the corporates all racing to take part. right, in all of this infrastructure, so yeah, it's gonna be a wild year coming up.
Well, and that's actually something we did touch on this when we were talking capital contract, but it's worth mentioning again too. You can now explain to a TradFi investor that they can invest capital in Morpheus as a project without having to also describe what Ethereum is. And for a lot, I think that we should not like discount that because I do think that a lot of the same people who would be interested in one would be interested in the other. I say this a lot, like the Venn diagram of the Ethereum community and the Morpheus community is a pretty tight overlap, but it's still like there is a barrier to entry if you're walking into someone's office describing investing in DAI and what that actually means, and then having to take a step back and say, okay, so do you know what Ethereum is? Because if the answer is no, now you have a whole another rabbit hole of hurdles to overcome to see that like financial support. And we do not, very soon as of the time of listening to this, do not have that same hurdle anymore. Um,
Yeah, 100%.
so before we get out of here, David, can you give any sneak previews of things that might be coming down the line from a more technical perspective? Because I know your work specifically is more so on the agentic side of things, less so on the capital side of things in terms of how your time's divided, at least to my knowledge. Maybe I'm wrong about this.
That's a good question. So on the technical side, there's just a lot going on. For those that have been following the API gateway, that's been really cool. It's made it so much easier for the average developer to just create a key, plug it into their app, and now they're using Morpheus Inference without having to run a node, without having to understand the router or any of those aspects. So, that's been a huge step forward. And a ton of people have been testing it out. So, they're effectively the work of the open source devs has been to kind of scale it, right? Polish up the infrastructure, make sure it's ready to handle a lot of usage. And so I believe there's a bunch of upgrades going out this week that will basically be this new industrialized version of the API. So if you haven't gone to openbeta.more.org, check it out 100%. Because for developers, why would you be paying 10x for some proprietary model when we're seeing literally the same outcomes, right? The same quality or approximately the same quality, within a few points of the proprietary systems with these open source systems, right? So if you're using and the upgrades are coming for speech to text and text to speech and these embeddings, all these sort of primitives that people need are all in the works for this upgrade of the router, right? But as part of that, if you've been using the open beta, you'll want to create a new key. So this is upgrading the security infrastructure, like the two-factor, all the identity stuff involved in it. So your old key will deprecate, and all you have to do is push the button, make a new key, pop it in your app, right? It should take you under a minute. Yeah,
The Discord channel that this is a one-time reset. That
yeah,
is only going to reset it one time, and then further updates will not require you to do so. So
yeah, yeah,
just so people know. Yeah, because I know it is. It's one of those things that's not hard to do, and it's very easy, but I'm sure people will have resistance just to be like, oh, I have to reset up my login. It's one time, and the gateway is going to improve significantly from what I can tell, and like that, like test things I've heard about. To my knowledge, too, the inference is still free, correct? Covered
yeah.
by basically
They're
community
yeah.
inference.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a subnet. There's community contributing to it, and they're kind of doubling down on like we've got a lot of room to scale this for free, and come and use it, right? And long term, it's a matter of just holding more tokens, right? And staking them. But for now, especially the text models, right, don't require as powerful GPUs as like image generation or especially like video generation is very heavy. But for now, like, yeah, come plug in what you're doing and try it out. It's also worth saying that on the capital side, I want to give credit to the people who have been working on the UI. They've done an incredible job of rebuilding the dashboards for the capital side of this. So you can't just put the smart contracts live and like it doesn't magically update the websites and everything like this. So the people that have been building the dashboards in parallel have been updating all of the infrastructure so that when the smart contracts get upgraded, so do the websites, so do the dashboards, right? So you'll see in the dashboard the ability, to provide these different Aave assets and see your yield, and it looks really slick. I've seen some of the previews, but it's a really good upgrade. And so there'll be a dedicated page now for more.org/capital, and going there, it'll give you information about, why this is interesting to do, bring your ETH, bring your Bitcoin, bring your stables, and that call to action, okay, take me to the dashboard, right? And kind of give people a little more information about how it works, right? Before they see pop in your staking. But that's a lot of heavy lifting, and that's how you get to mainstream adoption, is having beautiful, easy to use products. So that's worth highlighting.
Builders, I was about to say, like the unsung heroes, because it is a lot of work. Someone has to build it, and ironically, that's the way that I experience Morpheus, and the vast majority of people experience Morpheus is through that work. So hugely important, and shout out to those people. I'm excited to see it. I have not seen the demo or like imaging of that quite yet, but I can't wait to see what is my new Morpheus experience going to be from a capital perspective. Yep. So, well, David, thank you for jumping on. This has been great as always. I always look forward to having you and hearing all the updates from everything going on within the community. As you touched on, the community is so large now that I don't know that one person can have a window into everything that's happening, because there's so many people doing things all at once. And so getting another voice that's seeing, Morpheus from different perspectives than I am is really awesome. So thank you. Much appreciated.
Awesome, man. Good to be here.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
I'm trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.
You're listening to Brain Power.